Hello, and welcome to One Voice Live. This is a space where we talk about One Voice, what it is, and how it fits into the world of singing. I'm your host, Natalie Rankin, welcoming you to episode number 49, where we are continuing our One Voice in Artistry series. Today, my guest is Mr. Jackson Perrin. He is a One Voice coach and master. He is a songwriter and a rock band frontman and a yodeler in training. Welcome, please, Jackson Perrin.
Hello. Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy that you're here. Before we jump in, Jackson, I would really love to know what you are obsessed with right now. Tell me.
I've really been obsessed with discovering new music again. I want to be able to give a little backstory with that. Like when I was in middle school, it was really easy to find new artists, right? Like you went to a live show, you would find who's on that label, and you would just go through all the bands. At the time, a lot of them, particularly in certain genres, they sounded a lot alike. And now it feels so vast, it's almost overwhelming. So I kind of started diving into those curated playlists and finding some new artists and things like that. And it's been really exciting again,
Yes, that's exciting. I always forget those are there. I always forget about those playlists that are curated specifically for me. You gonna ask me what I'm obsessed with right now?
Of course. What are you obsessed with right now?
I'm obsessed with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I always will be. And I think it's now an annual tradition for me to watch Buffy all the way through when it turns fall.
A good friend of mine, he is always turning people onto it. I got my roommate into it, and then my roommate is also trying to, induct people into the Buffy the Vampire Slayer world. And he always insists on skipping the first season. And they definitely have kind of like a director's cut version to how can you finish it in a month and a half,
Right.
as opposed to watching every single ep.
It's very common for people to skip the first season because it's the quality doesn't really establish itself until the later seasons. But this time around is my second time around, and I watched all of season one. The very first time, like you said, I had someone introduce me to it, and they told me what episodes to watch, and we skipped a lot of season one, and season two for that matter. But knowing the characters and knowing the show, I feel like they actually do a pretty good job of establishing the relationships and establishing the characters in season one. They're just more of more caricatures in season one than real people. Yeah, it's a masterpiece, I think. Jackson, are you ready to dive into this topic?
100%. Let's do this. Let's go. Go time.
I first want to know what you think the difference is between an artist and a technician.
I guess the difference would be the intention, right? I think that would be something that I could put my foot down on and really point it out. As a technician's intention is to gain skill, knowledge, data, and become better at their craft, whereas an artist's intention is to move an audience, move people, share something. Technician doesn't necessarily have to share something. I don't know. It's almost like I think of a cook, right? A cook doesn't necessarily. They can be a technician when they're making their meal and they're designing their own recipe, but they're not necessarily being an artist until they share that meal. This is always something that could be argued, but that's kind of how I would see it.
That's brilliant. So let's entertain this idea. Let's take that further. So essentially you're saying a chef is both. And
Totally.
When you're cooking in the kitchen, you are executing technique. And then when you're sharing or presenting, you're an artist. So how does that work in music? How does that work as a singer or performer and in your specific experience?
Sure. I had a really awesome conversation with a close friend of mine just yesterday. They were talking about how they have committed themselves, particularly in this time we're in. They're not seeing many people, so they're practicing the piano, for instance, 3 hours a day. And I was like, that's so interesting. I wanted to know a little bit more about their particular goals. Because, if I have to be honest with myself, I sat on a piano and just jammed for 3 hours, I might get better, but I'm not necessarily going to grow in specific skills unless I have those intentionally laid out in front of me. Right? And it was less to them about getting better at reading music, but
Hmm.
being able to have freedom when they played. So that then they moved it into the artistry side of it. They wanted to be able to
Hmm.
jam with people and not have to find it, because that's the technician in them trying to
Right.
play within the key, within where they're going, within the time. So they don't want to feel like a technician in that moment. They want to feel specifically as an artist. So that they did is they're growing all of their skills as a technician, so then they can freely be an artist in a room with other people.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I feel like we just hit the heart of what this whole conversation is about to be about.
Cool.
Um, yeah, I think that's so important. I think what we just uncovered there is that most of us want to be both.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, tell me. Oh, this is my next question. So interesting because we've already touched on this topic. It could be said that one voice training is incredibly specific and technical. So, how can that technical work help us in terms of artistry?
Hmm. I mean, I think it goes back to that freedom thing that we were just talking about, right? Because in one voice, you have things like weight, right? Let's just take that idea.
Hmm.
And you want a very specific weight, and what it is a very specific intensity of the vocal cords touching in order to create a specific sound, quality of sound.
Yep.
More breathy, less breathy, and that's just the overarching idea that we all know of. So if I want to build, as a technician, a very clean mid weight throughout my chest coordination and middle coordination.
Hmm.
Freedom, that's what I want to have. So then I can move that over to the artistry side of it. So I don't have to think of it anymore. The whole idea, I remember with One Voice, particularly when I was learning about it, it was like, oh my God, I have to think about all this stuff. How am I supposed to think of all this stuff and then act the song or even connect with people? I was fighting that part. I was trying to combine the artistry with the technician, not realizing the technical work is separate. You need to separate them. You can combine them.
Hmm.
However, it becomes a lot more work because then you're having to compartmentalize when you were trying to achieve both things at the same time versus when you were actually giving yourself time to become a technician versus an artist.
Right. I think it would be much less fun, let's say, as a jazz pianist, it would be much less fun to get into that jam group with people and get into the improv section and have to remember, oh, what key signature is this? Okay, how many flats? Okay, oh wait, can we stop? Okay, just need to practice the scale really quick to get back, and then I'll hop back in. It's like the artistry is when inspiration strikes, and you
Hmm.
have the technical skill to back it up. Say the singer practicing midweight hasn't put the time in, hasn't dedicated the time for the vocal practice, and so that weight isn't as conditioned as it could be. And
Hmm.
then they get into the audition room or the rehearsal room or something, and because they have to focus on technically how to create sound in that way, it takes away from their ability to act the song. It takes away from their ability to share with the audience. So in this particular episode of One Voice Live, we're discussing non-musical theater performance. So can you think of a time that you really had that artistic freedom thanks to your technical skill when you were performing in clubs?
Absolutely. You know, one thing I will have to say is that when it comes to musical theater versus just performing music,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a story and an emotion that you're trying to convey.
Mm-hmm.
There's still something you're trying to share. So when I move that over to that question you just said, if I have the ability to then have like a heavy weight going up to the top of my middle coordination, and I want to have that express a certain emotion on a particular lyric, on a particular melody line,
Yep.
that gives me freedom to be able to then convey that message with my audience.
Yep.
And that I think that happened particularly when I had a song that I wrote, which was really hard for me to do in general, and then I had to record it, and that was fine because I could do one take. But to then rely on it in a performance setting
Mm-hmm.
after in the context of other songs that I had just performed before and have to be ready to do after. I don't
Right.
want to just throw myself away in it.
Right.
It was really a lot of freedom, not just in that moment to then connect with an audience artistically, but also freedom as a technician to know later in this set I'm going to be able to not be out of gas, right?
Oh, that's huge. To be able to deliver the performance you want to deliver and know as a singer, as someone who knows your voice really well, that you have gas left in the tank for the
Yeah.
show and to do those at the same quality that you want to do.
Yeah.
Um, wow. Yeah, that's great. If you if you didn't have one voice training, what would your experience as a singer and a performer be like?
I mean, there were so many absolutes before I like came into one voice, absolutes in terms of like my range, for instance, or the quality by which I could sing a specific note,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I would live that world. And so all it would do is it would put a lot of restrictions on my performance. It wouldn't necessarily, I can't say it would hurt me as an artist because I could still play within that range. I could still
Totally.
play within that ability, right?
Yeah.
But like the bird's eye view of where I am now, I could see that now I have more options. It's such a meta thing to talk about because in real time at the time, I would feel I was, I had certain options I had to rely on, which I do still feel like right now as well, but there are more options to me available in my
Absolutely.
current state.
Yeah. You came in with limits and now you've learned to question and challenge your limits as a singer. I think you brought up something really beautiful about just what it is to be an artist and to have the mind and heart of an artist. We will always do the best with what we have. You
Yeah,
know? There's so
yeah.
many like examples that I could give, but like a painter who only has one set of paints and other people have the most expensive paints, the most expensive brushes, but a painter with just one set of paints can still make something beautiful and still feels called to use what he has to create something.
Yeah, 100%. That's just the whole thing. It's not about having more or less. It's about what you want and what's helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the conversation, I think. Well, it's like two couple conversations we're having, but I agree. You have someone with a pencil and they create something that you feel like you can live in, or they've created something that you've been to before.
Yeah.
That's beautiful too. They've created a face, a self portrait better
Mm-hmm.
than I could even remember in my mind what they looked like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I love that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great call out too. I love that.
What did you mean when you said we were having two conversations?
I think the conversation is like we're having that conversation of the limitations conversation of you have this much stuff, and does that make you more or less, right? And
Mm,
then I think we're having the conversation of a technician versus artistry, right?
yeah. Do you have any more thoughts on technicianness technique technician? Yeah, do you have any other thoughts on technician versus artist, or do you feel like we've come to the conclusion that we probably all want to be both?
Yeah, I think we all work in different ways, right? As an
Mm-hmm.
artist, you can be an artist only use skills as an artist as opposed to being a technician for the artist. Like there's so many different ways to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not even backwards or forwards. It's so many different ways, so many angles and options, right?
Right.
But you might not ever see yourself needing to approach something as a technician until something happens within your artistry that calls for that.
Ooh, yeah. I feel like a lot of singers come up against that. Like they don't even know. They're like, I didn't know I had this limit until I wrote this song and I found out that I can't sing the song that I wrote. It has
Totally.
a higher note that I'm like, oh, I thought I could do that, but I tried it a couple nights on stage and it really is not working. That's where
Absolutely.
one voice comes in. That's where we have to get technical. That's where we zoom in and isolate those parts of your voice that feel a little weaker, and we bring them up to meet the rest of your voice so that you can express the way that you want to express.
Yeah, I love that. I will going back to the conversation of artistry in musical theater versus artist. I know it's not that's not the conversation we're having, but artistry musical theater or artistry in just music or making music or commercialism within it as well is that you can change the key. You don't really run into that option a lot in musical theater, but at the same time, as an artist, you're like, no, I want that key. That's what I want. And if that's what you want, well, then there you go. That is one angle that we're talking about. Of now, I see that I need one voice or a technique that can get me to what I want to achieve as an artist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think we're also after longevity and health.
100%.
And that really takes knowledge of technical skill and knowledge of airflow and weights and
Yes.
resonance and all kinds of stuff, so that especially for people who are touring or people who are consistently putting out albums and have to be in the recording studio, so that they can do what they do for as long as possible.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, like that's most of the conversations I have with um, I want to say technicians, but singers who come to me as artists first, as songwriters first. It's that
Mm-mm.
the conversation is a lot around I can't do this yet.
Right.
It's not that I want, it's that I cannot do this, and that I think that's a testament to there is something happening in their artistic life that is feeling inhibited. Right? It's
Yeah.
not like I am an artist and I hear something I want to do. It's more like I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I've already written, like you said before,
Right.
and I can't achieve it right now. So
Something
that's why they come to it somebody.
It's something that feels like it wants to come out, but I don't know how to make it come out the way that it wants to come out, which as an artist is such a tricky, hard thing. I am I will say closeted songwriter. I don't share my music a lot, but I write songs occasionally, and there's nothing like the feeling of frustration when my specifically on the guitar, or I also play a baritone ukulele, like when my technical skill doesn't yet meet the quality that I want the song to have.
Mm.
Like in my head, it sounds like this really cool, finger picking pattern, but I physically can't do that yet.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's extremely frustrating. But yeah, I mean, I know that the only thing standing in my way is just hours of practicing and hours of internalizing and physically doing the thing
yeah.
to then acquire the skill. And singing
Yeah.
is no different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What advice do you have for people who make music but feel limited in their vocal ability?
Is this in the context of people who aren't in the world one voice or who are already in it and practicing it?
Mm, let's do both.
When you were asking that question, I was like, I kind of found something I could offer to both people, which would be it beneficial because of the people who are in one voice because they would know how to assess the terms and connect them to this idea. But I would say listen to your favorite singers or listen to the music that's in your head and
Mm-hmm.
describe it specifically what you enjoy about it. Really specific things here. The breath quality. How much is it breathy? Is it not breathy? What the power within it, right? The kind of music that is inspired by artists that they love, why they love them. Is it the tone? What about tone? Like what about is it like the space? Is it the warmness, the brightness, right? All of those things, I'd want them to be able to get all of those terms for themselves, so
Mm-hmm.
then they can actually create a goal. Because that's my technician side speaking, right?
Yes,
I would want to bring them from an artist mindset to a technician's mindset.
totally.
That would be the thing I'd offer as advice for both people,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
Is to get specific.
Yeah, get specific and bring your technician mind up.
Yeah. And then you can actually create goals, and then you really have somewhere to go rather than just, oh, I can't and other people can.
Exactly.
What would you say to someone who is stuck in the loop of comparing themselves and their voices or their music to that of other artists?
Well, I mean, first, of course, I would really align with him and explain, like, we always will do that, it will never end, right? That's something, and it's a good skill, right? It's a good thing, and it is actually something that helps us become better and stronger at understanding what we like of other people's voices and artists, and inspired by,
Yeah.
right? I would first, like, calm down and say that's great, and then it's not, it's like using this things for you, using this skill for you. Look at it as a skill and see that you can work on your behalf as opposed to working against you.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I mean, it would be a conversation, I think, more than anything, because I don't want that to stop. Because that's them exploring, that's them being excited. Well, you guys have that conversation all the time, right? It's
Yeah.
keep the excitement, keep you like jazzed about going in it. Like
Mm-hmm.
that, like just change the perspective of that skill that you're actually practicing.
That's a really great point. All it needs is reframing in order
Yeah,
to not
exactly.
squash. In my experience, when I get stuck comparing, my conclusion on my most unhealthy negative days are, well, then I should just quit. If I can't write a song the way that Taylor Goldsmith from Dawes can write a song, there's no point in trying. I quit. And I start to I call it compare and despair. Like, I just,
That's funny.
I just am like, how in the world could I ever be as good as that? Or
Yeah.
how could I also be, how if that person is allowed to be that good and I'm allowed to be this mediocre, how am I
Yeah.
still allowed in the world? Or like, how could there possibly be space for me? If Phoebe Bridgers is also in the world, like what the heck? But I think taking that reframe that you just offered, it would, rather than squash my creativity, it would spark my curiosity of like, why do I love this person? What are their songs like? So I would get specific. I would say, what do I like about Taylor Goldsmith's songs? What do they make me feel? What is the structure? What are the instruments that I hear in these songs? What is his singing like?
Yeah.
Um, does his writing use a lot of imagery, or are his rhymes always perfect, or the list could go on and on. And then try to internalize and emulate the things that I hear.
Yeah.
I think that's how all artists are. All of the interviews that I've ever watched with my favorite singer-songwriters is just them talking about their favorite people and who they grew up listening to, and like,
Yeah.
like it makes so much sense that, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but like, like Jacob Collier, for instance, his work.
Of
It's so
course.
obvious to me that he listened to a ton of Stevie Wonder
Yeah.
growing up and just internalized his influence. And now, it's like woven into the fabric of the music that he makes. Um,
Yeah, that genius is just
yeah. But even
ridiculous.
for him, it's not completely original to him. Everyone is influenced in some
Yes.
way.
Yes.
So, okay, so coming back to the compare and despair feeling, the reframe is, okay, this is a sign that you are really digging what that person is doing, so much so that you wish you could do it. So get specific. And then what's the next step? If I'm like, I know this is what I want.
Well, with one voice, it's then contextualizing them into the terms that you need, like the skills that you need, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
would be the next part. It's like, oh, these are the things I love about their voice. Now, how do I transfer that into a set of skills? Now, how do I
Mm-hmm.
practice that set of skills?
Right.
How do I make that a part of my vocal practice?
And that's
Uh,
how we get technical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that. And then once again, this is just another angle, right? But this
Hmm.
is the angle of being stuck at, instead of being inspired, feeling like the compare and despair. Or I have a friend who says, they say analysis paralysis, right? You're not
Ooh.
moving forward. You're just so analytical. You're not moving anywhere. And that's the thing. Like, you're absolutely right. Like even Phoebe Bridgers, like you just said, they
Mm-hmm.
call her the generation's Elliott Smith.
Yep.
You know, Connor Oberst, Bright Eyes, before they called him the Elliott Smith of his
Yep.
generation.
And then they
Gen
made a
X,
band
right?
together.
Yes, and then they exactly Oblivion project. I forgot the exact
Yeah.
name, but
The name is really
it,
long.
it's brilliant. It's that's the thing. I think people get so hung up on originality, but without something that came before you with there would be no context. How
Mm-hmm.
would you be able to be an artist without being inspired by another human being? And then how would you be able to be a technician without being, admiring someone else's skills?
Right.
It just doesn't end. It's if you want to look at a technician as like a sport, it's like, oh, I can't dribble the ball like them, then like I'm copying them. It's like, well, it should
Right.
be, you need that
Yeah, at
skill.
some point we're all playing basketball. Like we
Exactly.
all like that just got me thinking about like, you know, again in my own experience I worry like, well this, this idea has already been presented or this word has already been said or this
Yeah.
series of notes has already probably appeared in the same song before. Like, no duh, uh there's only so many notes. And there's only so
Yes.
many English words and they're all being said in different forms and different varieties, and that shouldn't stop me.
Yeah. It's also not crazy to think that, or anything to be ashamed of, that a lot of us as artists share the same goal, and it's to connect and to move people.
Yeah,
It's if that makes you feel unoriginal, I feel that's crazy. I think that's intense. That's crazy, right?
that's
Like that
intense.
doesn't make it unoriginal at all. It's the goal.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it
it's
is.
it's it's cool.
And we all just want to play basketball. Like, I
Yeah,
just
we
want to
all just
be
really want to. Yeah.
in the game. Yeah,
Exactly.
I love that. That made comparing it to sports just neutralized it for me. Like, made it much less about like my soul being on the line and just like, oh yeah, technical skill. All
Yes.
they have is practice and
Hmm.
experience.
Yeah. And that's not taking away the fact that when you miss a shot or when you don't get the note, it's not frustrating. That's not what we're saying.
Right, because it is.
Yeah, of course. Like,
What would you say is the biggest gift that One Voice has given you regarding singing your own music?
it's the biggest gift and the biggest curse, right? It's that it's limitless with I have no limitations, not in terms of what I can do, but what I know I can achieve. So it's a great gift, but it's also something that can kind of help me lose focus of of what I want, you know?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think that's the answer, honestly.
Cool. I'm gonna ask
What
you
about
about
you?
that. It. Do you find yourself getting distracted by getting zoomed in too far on one specific technical thing, and it distracts you from the creativity side of it?
That can happen, but then that would take me to understanding, being patient with me, knowing that that's my technician side working, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that does happen sometimes, but then it's just reframing. I love that term, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what we need to do all the time with anything in life, right? Is reframe everything. Like take a moment, reframe this. But it also it hinders me in terms of like making my own sound, right?
Mm.
Or and it's not even my own sound because that goes back to the originality of it, but a consistent sound. That's what I'm always looking for. A consistent sound. If like you listen to this musician and they sound that way on a different song. So then I get all in my head. I'm like, well, does that make it all the songs sound the same? And then I'm like, of course they all sound the same because it's just my piano and I playing music until I work with my producer and other bandmates, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But just a constant. There's always doubt. There's always gonna be doubt. But then there's doubt within all these other ideas that One Voice has given me, which is like, oh well, what is it? What are you doing as a technician? And then also, what are you trying to achieve? And does it sound consistent with everything else? Is it the same vocal tract and all these things? There's just so many things
Oh,
to think about, you know?
yeah. Yeah, because if I think about, all of our favorite people, uh, Brendan Urie, Whitney Houston, Willie Nelson, like all these people always sound the same.
They got a sound.
Right, they had a sound. Freddie Mercury. But
Yeah.
do you think that what do you think the answer is there? Like, do you think that they decided on a sound, or do you think that they're just using their, like, I call them like their factory settings, like they're just using what they were born with or what they were influenced by?
I don't know. Like Ben Folds in a great interview that I read with him, he said like the thing that you're gonna always be having to work on is finding your sound. And when I read it, I was in like high school, and I was like, oh, like your sound, like what your genre is.
Right.
But I don't know if that's what he was talking about. I think he was actually talking about your sonic signature, how you sound, no matter what is backing you up, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that whole thing, because I have such a musical theater background, it contradicts itself sometimes. It's in my head. That's what I'm saying. It's like I'm like, well, I need to be able to have legit classical musical theater with a pop's rock sound, but at the same time, I want it to still be in the same marketing world. So then there's a lot. That's all the commercial work, right?
Yep.
And it can be overwhelming, but it can also be really exciting. Reframing once again, but over here in the in just the writing music and just performance world of just making music, original work, it
Mm-hmm.
can really get you in your head sometimes. And then I just think it's that conversation all over again about inspiration versus is it stopping you?
Totally. It's just a cycle.
Absolutely.
I'm convinced that the only thing that we can actually trust and rely on, the only thing that's going to be consistent is these types of thoughts.
Yeah. I think
Um,
you can work on them and get faster at getting through it, right? That's why you
totally.
practice this positive way of thinking,
Right.
right? I
Yeah.
think that's the only way to do it.
Yeah. And I've recently been the most interested in remaining inspired because I find that when I'm inspired, my inspiration is the priority and I am more excited than I am scared. Or I am
Yes.
more determined than I am scrutinizing my own skill and like waiting until everything's ready and perfect before I can like emerge into the world.
Yeah.
So I want to offer something to you that you offered to me once,
Whoa.
and I want to remind you that your sound is your sounds
Yeah.
because it's coming from you. It's yours.
Yeah.
And like Ben Folds probably doesn't always have the same vocal tract.
Yeah. I love that so much.
Yeah. So there you go.
Thank you.
Ooh, last thing. What one voice theory or one voice tool or concept has given you the most confidence as an artist?
Whew. That's a tricky question. Like what one voice theory technical world has given me most confidence as an artist world.
Right. Exactly.
See what you did
Ha
there.
ha ha ha.
Well, technically speaking, like resonance theory is never something that is like something I lean on every day. And then now I move it over to the artistry. It's like I feel confident as an artist to approach notes now, all in sense of feeling as opposed to what I'm hearing. And that in
Mm,
itself is always a challenge. Don't get me wrong, but has something that's given me so much freedom as an artist on stage to go, oh, if I can't hear myself always, I know I can lean in on this sensation as opposed to what I'm hearing, you know?
right. Yeah. In the world of musical theater, you are spoiled with really good sound.
Oh my
Ah.
gosh.
Which I assume was is probably different in the world of performing, your own music in clubs in New York City.
There's some amazing sound designers for those venues, and they're just lovely. But sometimes the space is just old and not
Right.
great in that way. But one thing about performing live music is that live I can go, hey, can I get more of this? As opposed to being on stage for a musical, it's like I can't. It's
Oh,
like
totally,
excuse the
totally.
audience. Let
Yeah.
me break this. It's a
What
different
if you could do that? Hold,
like.
hold, please.
This
Yeah. So
monitor's broken.
I assume you're more, uh, and I've seen it, in live music and when I go to concerts and stuff. Like it's more of a constant communication, a consistent communication with your sound people and monitor people throughout the performance. And
Yeah,
I think it's so beautiful that that's that that's a part of it.
I mean, some bands, I know this lovely artist, her name is Petite Celine. She has her own sound designer that runs her board no matter what venue she goes
Ooh,
to.
that's
And he
cool.
gets doing a lot of like patches and things like that as well. And he's a, he's part of the band at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, at the same time, a sound designer is that night wherever you go, part of the band. The person who's recording your music for a music video that you're doing a live set, especially in these times right now, that's part of your sound. That's part of your band. They are a
Yeah.
bandmate that night. You
Right.
know.
Wow. Yeah, that's a cool way to look at it. So what about coming back to the resonance points theory? So say that, you don't have in-ear monitors and you can't really hear yourself. You might not have your own monitors coming towards you, or maybe they're not on, or they're broken, or they're busted or something. How do you rely on the resonance points
Yeah,
theory?
there's quite literally a balance, right? Well, there's the how to rely on the resonance is understand, like, first of all, as a technician in this moment, hey, I know I'm distorting this vowel. So the sympathetic resonance is going to be more in my hard palate. But I understand it's an A. So I understand an A above middle C. So I understand as a technician that, hey, this is going to be in my nasal cavity resonance.
Yep.
So I have the primary resonance is going to be there, and I have to trust that more than I feel sympathetically the resonance in my heart palate. So
Yeah.
that's what But when that's happening, it's not always a, like we said before, 100% artist, 100% technician. This is kind of the conversation we've been having amongst other things. It's like there's never all A or all B. It's
Mm-hmm.
always a balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's when the balance kind of goes down, like, oh, I might not be able to express, or I have to now perform it and sell it, even though I'm not feeling it as much because I have to rely now on my technician side.
Right, right. The actor guy can call upon technician guy at any time,
That's the same thing. Yeah,
whenever.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, man, it's so interesting. I mean, I wonder what, like, really experienced proficient singers or really experienced proficient like banjo players, like what goes through their minds, how much of it is artist and just kind of like a meditative state, and how much of it is technician guy. Um, I
And
want to know.
yeah, and can they even track it? Can they even track when they were in that mode or when they're not in that mode?
Right.
Or when it flips and switches for them.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It reminds me of the singers. I would grow up. Well, this singer, but a lot of singers I would grow up listening to, and I would meet them after the show, and I would just go like, "How do you do it?" And a lot of them, some of the best ones, honestly, would just go, I just take a big breath and I just go for it. And like that, like, it disappointed me as a kid. But then I got older. I'm like, for some people, it is that way. For
Yep.
me, it never has been and never will be, and I'm happy to have that be the case because I'm just very analytical, you know. But it is that conversation. Like, sometimes I think we're gonna have those interviews and those opportunities to talk to the artist and not be
Mm-hmm.
disappointed when we don't get that answer of like, I
Mm-hmm.
think of it like this. I give a big, huge credit to One Voice to that I can even think this way.
Yeah. And I think there are people who, even non one voice people, who have the analytical mindset that you and I both share,
Sure.
and people who can get specific in their own way, and they make up their own language for it, and they, only if,
Yes.
even if they only speak it to themselves, they they
Totally.
have gotten specific and have found a way to create what they want to create, consistently, and they can sustain it. And it would be really cool to get inside their heads.
Totally. Which is probably why, that's why a lot of times you have this, what we consider unhelpful sometimes, but this very sensational speaking way of talking about how they are executing something. And it's not helpful for a majority, but for them personally, it's very helpful. And that goes full circle to One Voice again, too. It's like, it's not about being right, it's about what's helpful to you.
Yeah, what makes sense.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Ooh, there's some good stuff in there. Some really, really good nuggets.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I feel like we really uncovered a lot of great stuff, and I definitely feel inspired and excited, and I love the connection that we uncovered between artistry and technical skill. I think that's exactly where One Voice fits. What final thoughts do you have?
I feel very grateful as well, because the more I can, have this be external, externalize all of these thoughts, it's very inspiring for me as well, and it's so inspiring to hear you talk too. So thank you for your curiosity and your specific questions that drove this conversation.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Jackson,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm gonna sign off, and I'll see you on the other side.
See ya.
Thank you guys so much for watching. As far as announcements, be on the lookout for our final One Voice Live episode 50 next month. Hope you have a very happy beginning to your holiday season. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Sing One Voice. We'll catch you next time on One Voice Live. Bye.